The Ad Podcast. We've got an exciting guest for you guys today. Jason Haddad is a senior media executive and advertising professional with the agency 2x4, a highly award-winning independent advertising and marketing agency with offices in Chicago and Chattanooga, Tennessee. 2x4, Jason has served in a leadership capacity on the agent's media team and founded in 1998, focuses on brand evolution and nimble communications for a variety of high-profile clients. Betfred Sportsbook, to note one, he's led the media team servicing the Betfred Sportsbook account. Throughout his career, he's worked with diverse brands such as the Chicago Bears, DePaul University, Bridgestone Firestone, and the Navy Pier. 2x4 is known for moving away from traditional about page philosophies, preferring to focus on brands that adapt and reshape themselves to meet changing consumer needs. Some of their key services are comprehensive brand strategy, digital media, social media management, content creation, and PR, with locations and headquarters at Dearborn Street in Chicago, Illinois, with that additional office that we mentioned in Chattanooga. Jason, thanks so much, man. Appreciate you coming on.
No problem. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. So I have a friend with the last name Haddad. He owns the nicest cigar shop in all of West Hollywood.
Nice.
It's right across the street from the famous Viper Room Club venue.
Oh, yeah.
It's, on one side you have the Whiskey, and then on the other side you have the Roxy, and then right next door is the famous Vagos Motorcycle Gang Tattoo Parlor. So it's quite a fun neighborhood. But I forget where Lath is from, but remind me, where does that name come from?
My family is from Iran originally.
Okay, nice.
Like my dad came over here to go to college and met my American mom, and then we lived in Iran for a while, came back here.
Wow.
But Haddad is a more commonly like a Lebanese name.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you guys have family in Iran still?
Not really. Like, I mean, none of our close family, like we all fled the country during the revolution. So like peace out, like got out of there then. Yeah.
Yeah. So not any immediate family members in the chaos of the current situation.
No, thankfully, one less thing to worry about.
Yeah, totally. Well, we won't derail too hard, but obviously wanted to wish you well if you did have any people still back in country. But on that note, talking about kind of origin stories and family history, where did you grow up? What'd you study? What'd you go to school for? And how'd you find yourself in the media world?
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's see. I grew up a little bit all over the place. So I, like mentioned before, I lived in Iran until I was about 5. And then we came back to this country, like the late 70s when the revolution was going on. Moved in Houston for a while. And then we moved to Denver when I was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9. Then my family's still all there. So they're hanging out in suburban Denver, living the high life with the great weather there. It's like one of those like well-kept secrets. I think people always assume it's like freezing and gross in Denver. I'm like, no, it's beautiful and sunny all of the time.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, God, I was home over the holidays and it was like 65 degrees and sunny the entire time I was there. I was like, okay, I'll take this over Chicago weather.
Oh my gosh. Well, compared to Chicago, I think when I came out and you and I first connected, I was at South by Southwest, and the Midwest always can be swingy. Like I'm
Sure.
from San Diego, and I don't think we've had much variation from 68 to 79 this year. But at South by, there were days like I would wake up and be like, okay, it's gonna be 85 degrees today. I'm gonna wear in shorts, and then the next day it's 45, and you wish you had a jacket on. And then I flew to Chicago, and then it's snowing. So it's like, I opened up our Chicago office for my first agency, and I had to go there every other week. And it was, not during the fun time of the year, but I do love it in the fall and in the spring where you can go on a run in the lake, and, such a great city.
Yeah, it's like it's getting there. We're starting to turn the corner now into better weather. But Yeah, I guess to go back to your initial question. So I actually came to the Midwest the first time to go to college. I went to a small school called the University of Evansville in Evansville, Indiana, which is like the southwest corner of the state, sort of down there by the Kentucky and Illinois border off the Ohio River. So I spent my misspent college days there, like enjoying. I actually studied advertising, which was
Oh,
kind of
interesting.
at the time it was kind of one of those new majors. Like people didn't really like have it back then. It was like, okay. Now it's funny when I talk to college kids, they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm studying like very specific pieces of it." I'm like, when I was there, when I was studying advertising, it was like advertising. That was it. That was
Like
the whole course of study.
reading David Ogilvy's books and stuff like that.
Pretty much, right? Right, yeah. Then after college, I moved back to Denver and was sort of trying to figure out what to do with my life. Like, okay, what do I do? And I kind of fell into media, like, having a bit of an advertising major. I was looking around, seeing what jobs were out there, if there was anything. And weirdly enough, I had sent, back those days, you actually mailed your resume in with a cover letter, like so. I get this response. This guy calls me and he's just like, "Hey, like my name is John," and he's like, he's like, "I don't have a job for you, but I saw that you were in my fraternity." Like
Oh,
from college. So well, I figured I'd give you a call and see, like what you're looking for. And we had a good call, and he was like this independent like media guy where he had like a 2-person agency type of thing. And he connected me with a sales guy at Cats TV, which like Cats is still around. But yeah, they had like an opening for like a sales assistant. So I went in, interviewed, got the job, and about a year later, I got my first job as a media person at a media agency in Denver for a little bit. Was there for, I don't know, like a year and a half, and then everyone started moving to San Francisco to go work on dot coms, right? Like the
tech
dot com
boom.
explosion, tech explosion was happening. So that was the late '90s, and so I packed up and went and slept on a friend's couch for a few weeks. Got a job in San Francisco and was there for, God, 12 years, 11 years, something like that. Like,
Wow, wow, that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. Sort of grew up in media planning and strategy, in San Francisco for the most part. Yeah,
I love it. What fraternity were you in?
I was an SAE,
Okay,
Sigma Alpha Epsilon.
we won't hold it. We won't hold it against you.
Right. It's okay. I get it. You know what? I still have a text chain with my fraternity brothers that or you would still think we were 18 years old.
Oh my gosh. I know the feeling. I was walking through shop talk. You might like this story, and hopefully the viewers won't get too bored with this part of it. But I was walking through shop talk last week, big e-commerce conference in Vegas, and I'm walking back to the media center, and I hear Dylan, and I'm like, I look around, and I see my buddy Ray Ochoa, who is a fraternity brother of mine from Sigma Chi at UC Santa Barbara. And he came up to
Nice.
me and, we hugged and we talked and we hadn't seen each other. I don't even know how long. It's been at least 10 years or something like that. And he told me this story. He's like, man, I finally pulled off like the business development frat move of all time. I was like, what'd you do? He's like, well, I'm here because I'm like a high level Adobe partner. So we were doing a conference in San Jose for Adobe. And I grabbed a bunch of my clients, head of social for NFL, head of social for, some high up executives at Adobe. And I basically got them all in 2 Ubers and we drove over to the Sigma Chi House at San Diego State. And we handed them like $1,000 and told them to throw us a party. And we called it, we were doing a Gen Z, experiment. Watching college kids in their native environment,
Native environment. I love it.
studying their user behavior, and like as a reformed frat star, I always had that idea in my head, and Ray Ochoa beat me to it. So
Beat you to it. That's awesome.
yeah,
That's awesome.
I love it. All right, so San Francisco years
Hmm.
during the tech boom, 12 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
I've got the friends of mine who, I was still in school at that point, but the friends of mine who went through that same cycle, reported fortunes gained and lost, right?
Oh
Like a
God.
lot of so tell me a little bit about that time. What was it like? And, how'd you make it through and stay in San Francisco for 12 years?
I know, it's crazy. It's like I got there, and it was funny because I wasn't working on a tech business. I got hired to work on Saturn automobiles. All right, like the
Mm.
old school Saturns, may it rest in peace. But Hal Riney was the agency that I got this job, and it was a big agency for the day, right? This was like kind of just around the time that the big public, like the big holding companies, were starting to create themselves. So like I was there right about the same time that Hal Riney was acquired by Publicis. And so it
Ah,
was like this whole like sort of what's going on, but we were still very much an independent, agency. Like they didn't really like involve themselves. Like they slapped a logo on the building. That was pretty much it, right? In those days. But so I was working on Saturn, which was this huge, national auto brand. So like so very stable account for at the time, and started to gradually move around into other things because you work in an agency and eventually you wind up working on everything, a little bit of everything. So I was at Riney for 8 years. The first two I was on Saturn, and then I started working on, like, HP was the big one that I started working on. I was on that account for like most of the rest of the time I was there, about 6 years. And that was thankfully a very stable, obviously well established tech brand at that point. So it wasn't going anywhere. And I think that was the big thing, right? It was like we all had side hustle accounts, right? Where it's like, oh, you're gonna work on Webvan, which is what Instacart is now. Like back then, Webvan,
wow.
2000, Webvan was cutting edge. Like grocery stores will deliver to you, like what? So I worked on that. I worked on eToys, which I think like got bought by Toys R Us, which then died. But sort of like that whole cycle. I worked on a bunch of those little things like Discovery.com when they launched their website. Things like that. You kind of work on site. You cycle in and out of, but. I think I was lucky in the regard of Riney was one of those agencies that was probably abundantly cautious about taking on unknown VC backed sort of things. The CFO at the company at the time was very well known for being like, cash up front or we're not doing anything, sort of mentality. Because the agency was well known. It was like it's award winning. I mean, Hal was, he was a celebrity in the agency world in his day, and I think that played a large role in that. And I happened to be on very stable businesses, so I think there's some of that's just pure luck, right? You're just like, okay,
Yeah.
I was a dumb kid that was like, sweet, like what do I do? But I watched a lot of people kind of bounce around and do the like, oh, this startup is going to offer me twice as much money as I make right now, and whatever, and shares and stock, like all this stuff, and it's like, okay, like. I was definitely way too cautious to do that myself. I was like, I don't think I'm that guy. But and then I watched a lot of people go make a bunch of money for like 2 months, and then and then watch the place close around them. So it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of that, but there was so many. Like it was just like this constant cycle. So it was like, okay, you go jump around, would spend some 6 months here and a year there, and a lot of people made a lot of money, but it wasn't very consistent, right? So it was like, okay, and then a lot of those people like started just kind of parlaying that into like just straight up freelance work. I had a ton of friends who there was like a cottage industry for freelancers, especially in media, because I think there was always some need. And at that time, the media side of our business was really big in San Francisco. There was a ton of media shops out there. It was before they started consolidating all the big media buying into like the public, into the holdcos, and sort of consolidating. Like TV went to New York, and a lot of stuff came to Chicago, and not and a lot of stuff went to LA, and San Francisco started to kind of get bled out of the media buying functions for after a while. But in those days, there was a lot going on, and it was really before the digital world kind of was mature, right? It was you'd start getting, there's website stuff, but not a lot. It's like, some clickable banners if you were lucky, that was like a big deal, and it's yeah, so it was always a race though, it was always like there was always this like, like feeling like you're going up to the top of the roller coaster, just waiting for when's it going to drop, like with any business that you worked on. But it was crazy times, but it was fun. Like
Do you see any parallels to the .com run up? Do you see any parallels to the current market with like kind of AI
absolutely.
proliferation?
I
That's
mean,
not a good.
it's.
That's not what I wanted to hear, Jason.
I mean, I think there's a lot of similarity in terms of like, I think AI is poised to change the world in some of the same ways that the internet did, right? Like the proliferation of it and the access to just the average consumer. Because, you know, before we had regular internet and everyone was, you know, like online and doing their, before America was online, you know, like the internet was there. It's not like it was some, you know, like all of a sudden it hit and everyone had access to it. And I think it's the same thing with AI, right? Like these technologies have been around. It's not like they're
Yeah, it
brand
was like
new.
IBM. It was called machine learning before this
Machine
one,
learning,
right?
right? Yeah, like
Yeah.
media people have been like, I think all of us are sort of collectively looking at each other. We're like, okay, so you can type to it now, and you know, and it's easier to use, but it's not really like groundbreaking in terms of what it is, right? But it is, and I'm seeing it more and more. You know, like we're starting to experiment with it as an agency, and I think most of us are, right? Everyone's sort of like, okay, I got to evolve or die, so to speak, right? In the grand scheme of things, but it is enabling like a lot of like bad behavior too, but it's also enabling a lot of like really like speed of use, right? Like I mean, the stuff that I used to have to spend like hours doing desk research to find, you know, like it's just those like, you know, those good nuggets of information that you find when you're just sort of like, I need to prove this case out, whatever. I mean, you can you know, like ChatGPT or Claude or whoever, you know, can find that for you in minutes, you know, and it's just like, oh wow, you know, as long once it's like, I mean, it's not, it's sort of like search, right? When you first started Googling things and you realize like, oh, I can find things just by typing what I want, you know? So I see a lot of that. I see a lot of stability there, but I also see a lot of volatility, right? Because it's like, I mean, go onto your phone, you know, your app store on your phone and look for AI apps. I don't even know what 90% of them do. There's so many of them. And it's like, okay, who knows which ones are going to survive and which ones aren't. You know, I mean, I think it's like it's a pretty safe bet that there's a few that are already sort of like at the top of the market. That unless something weird happens, you know, like you're going to continue to see Chat GPT, you're going to continue to see Claude and Nano Banana, whatever. But you know, there's thousands of them out there now, and it's like, okay, like eventually one of them's gonna like hit a cultural vibe that like Google did, and suddenly you're gonna
Mm,
see that like, oh, this is where it is. Because I think right now there's still a healthy bit of skepticism in the, you know, like not just in the, you know, like I think in advertising you see a lot of it, but I think just even the general consumer, right? Like I mean, my parents are never going to use AI, you know, like, you know, they're like, what is this? But even like my, you know, my siblings, you know, wouldn't probably use it very often if you know, because neither one of them are in a kind of work where it would be necessary, and they're just used to Google. But I mean, I look at, you know, the Gen Z folks around my office, and it's funny because I chuckle because I'm like, this is probably the first like real sea change in technology that they've had to deal with in their lives, you
mm.
know. And I'm looking at, you know, like my generation, right, like the Gen Xers, and you know, we kind of grew up in this evolution of technology, right?
Yeah, you
It
had
was
the
like every few
internet, you
years.
had mobile phones, you
Mhm.
know, like basic mobile.
Smartphones, yeah,
Yeah.
like I mean,
Mhm.
all of these things changed, like even just like laptop computers
Oh,
being
yeah.
like, I mean, my when I first started my first job, I didn't have even a computer at my desk. We had one laptop, or no, one desktop in the whole building, you know, in the whole office. It was like, okay, we answered the, you know, the landline and wrote messages for our boss, you know. You know, it's like that's just how the world was, you know. And it wasn't even like it was really that long ago in the grand scheme, but it's the way that the world has changed so fast over the last even like 15 years is crazy. But this is like more than just an iterative change, right? Because I feel like, you know, like smartphone, it was a natural evolution of the dumb phone, right? You know, it's like you see that kind of thing, but this is like a jump. And I think it's like when we went from landlines only to all of a sudden having cell phones. You know, like this feels like that kind of jump where it's
Yeah.
like, okay, there's
It's like
there's a
it's
lot
a
more
hockey
to
stick
this.
moment.
Yeah, that's a good way
A
of
lot
putting
of
it.
a
I like
lot a
that.
lot of people compare it to this idea of like the second industrial revolution. Like we
Mhm.
had like we found electricity and then we found AI. I wonder if
Mhm.
that's a little bit dramatic, but you know, I guess we'll see how it nets out. You know, you mentioned something interesting around search.
Mhm.
You know, Google became the dominant search engine, and it almost became like the category. You know, like
Mhm.
you're like, oh, do you Google? Did you Google it? You know, it'd be like
Mhm.
when people start using your brand as a verb, that means
Mhm.
you've essentially kind of dominated the category.
Mhm.
But then we're also in this world now where 60% of searches no longer end with a click.
Mhm.
So people are doing searches in these places that aren't Google and they're
Mhm.
not clicking through, they're just reading the result at the top of the page. But
Yeah.
then you have branded search volume up and people more often buying when they come to your
Mhm.
websites. So they're not going to your website to do research anymore. And the whole retargeting, chase you around the internet thing doesn't matter
Mhm.
because when I come to your website, I'm ready to buy. So how do you think like the behavior around search and the responsiveness of a website to be more,
Mhm.
like let's show you what you want to buy versus try and educate you, move you down the funnel? How
Mhm.
are you seeing that showing up in the plans that you work on?
Yeah. It's funny that you bring this up because this is something I've been sort of noodling around with in terms of like just media planning in general, right? Because I think it goes well beyond search. Like search is one piece of that, and I think you're absolutely right. It's harder to figure out like what an intent signal looks like anymore, right? Like from before, but like I've been sort of reading a lot about like attention signals and like what are people doing, So we're starting to toy with things like media planning around what the consumer's doing, not like literally like what website they're on, but like how they're interacting, right? Like they're on their phone, they're scrolling, right? What is that? How do you get their attention when they're doing that? How do you stop them from scrolling, right? So it's like that interplay between we know the media placement's going to be on this, mobile website or whatever. We need the creative to get the consumer to stop, right? That's the goal, right?
Mm,
Versus like somebody who's maybe sitting back and like actively consuming like watching a video or something, that's where you can sort of be like, oh, now the creative can actually be telling the story, like talk to them, right? Like get them more engaged, right? Then there's, attention that's like they're moving through a space, right? Where things like at a home and, those types of, or even like outside radio and TV can play a role where it's like, oh, we don't really need to tell them a story there or don't have the real estate to. So we just want them to remember something, right? Like keep, like catch the logo, catch the tagline, whatever, and then there's deeper down, right? Where it's like they're still searching, they're still doing something. But again, you have to have your messaging sort of aligned in that where it's like catching them, giving them a reason to click. And that's harder, right? That's way harder than it's ever been before in a lot of ways. So like that's what we're trying to play with right now here is that sort of like dynamic of like, is this attention? Is it an attention play versus is it just a funnel play? Because like you can make the argument that all those things live somewhere in a funnel because I think all of us know the funnel. We're all like, say, this is how it works. But I think the consumer's behavior is more indicative of like what they're like, how they're consuming the media nowadays.
yeah, I love that. And I think also with the idea of like consumer behavior, we're for better or for worse, we know so much
Mhm.
more about people. Like the router can
Mhm.
tell what part of the house I'm in. And
Right.
if I have my phone and I'm sitting right here,
Mhm.
it's like the authentication, the my
Mhm.
phone talked to my computer says Dylan's sitting in this seat, whether there was a camera up or not. And if I'm over there sitting in front of the couch, then it's like phone, Samsung TV, Dylan's at
Mhm.
the seat.
Oh.
So it feels like we can know more about, not
Mhm.
only like what people are watching, but what they're doing in these, spaces that we thought maybe were, were more private than they actually were. But
I tell people
go ahead.
I mean, it's like I tell people all the time. I'm like that thing hanging on on your wall that you watch. That's a giant phone now. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
totally.
connected to the internet, which is also connected to all your other devices. Of course, it knows what you're doing. So, like, why are you surprised when you're watching something on TV and you look at your phone and it's an ad for something that you want? It's like,
Totally.
of course, it's going to happen that way. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great authentic, two devices basically builds authentication, right? So
Mm-hmm.
but the thing that I think that's interesting that you mentioned is that none of these AI platforms have
Mm-hmm.
become ubiquitous and they also haven't won the vernacular of like the verb,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, I started with ChatGPT. One day ChatGPT was down. Twitter
Mm-hmm.
was up. Twitter or X was in my, my tabs. And I'm like, oh yeah, Grok's there. Click there. Oh wow, Grok does this a little bit better. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I got these for Christmas.
Yeah. Nice.
And
Nice.
but now because if you're wearing hardware,
Mm-hmm.
hardware is like, oh, hey Meta, do this. Well, Meta's not going to ask Grok; it's going to ask Meta's AI. So
Mm-hmm.
the hardware interface becomes a touch point with AI,
Mm-hmm.
or Gemini because of the Google brand recognition. So it
Mm-hmm.
feels like there's still like a war to be won in this kind
Oh
of
yeah.
this race, don't you think?
I think so. I mean, I think there's still a lot of sort of like, because like I think they all have their quirks too, right? Where it's just like, okay, like, maybe I'm going to use ChatGPT for this thing, but I'm going to go over here and use Claude for this and Perplexity for that and Grok for this and, whatever, image generator thing over here. Like there's so many different ones that it feels like I think any technology has a little bit of this, right? Where it's like when they first release, it's like everyone sort of like has their like focus or the thing that they built their like from like the that base that they're built from, but then they try to be good at everything else too. But it quickly becomes obvious you're really good at one thing, maybe okay at one other thing, and then you're just sort of like also doing the rest of this stuff. And I think people are starting to like kind of play around with that. Like when as we talk about building more of like an AI infrastructure at the agency. That's one of the things that we're kind of like considering. It's like, okay, like what different platforms should we be like including in that, right? Do we need like, do we have a preference? Do we want to, do we want to use just ChatGPT or do we want to use, all of the above or whatever, right? And it's hard to tell because it is early days in this regard where you're like, okay, like which ones are doing it better? And is there something even better coming around the corner? Because I suspect that will probably be, another generation eventually, that's gonna like be seem even more crazy, but it's we'll see. Like we'll see who kind of comes out of this with, with their head held high. And I mean, I think ChatGPT was good because they were early to market in terms of the consumer mindset. I think they've got like that's probably the one that's closest to like like to the Kleenex of it all, but they're not quite there because I think they're also like I think you got the outsider Claude is coming in as the sort of like the Google of that where it's
Like the one that's like trustworthy.
yeah, where it's like, oh no, we're great, and it's interesting because I think they're all sort of still figuring it out. We'll see, like where it lands. I mean, I wish I could predict because you could be very rich. I'd be living on an island somewhere.
So on that note,
Mm,
ChatGPT was the first to cave to the
mhm.
advertisers. So
Oh yeah.
if you go on ChatGPT, there are now ads inside of
Mhm.
ChatGPT. As a media buyer, have you bought ChatGPT ads yet?
Not yet. It's funny because we've been talking about it and trying to figure out like what the best way to approach it is, So like we've done some stuff around like trying to do some sort of like audits and try to figure out like, how much brand presence some of our clients are appearing in, the AI ecosystem where it's like, what are you getting? But I think that the ad elements are still sort of a mystery to me, right? I'm like, maybe again, like I'm being a little cautious on some of this, but it's like I don't know. I don't know that the user experience is there yet. I don't know that the advertising experience is worth it, and I've got like for most of my clients, I think, my agencies, we're smaller. We have clients that are we call them like challenger brand types, right? So it's like the ongoing sort of communication with them is like every dollar you spend matters and needs to count for something.
Mm,
So there's less of that like experimental money floating around, which is, it's fun to have experiment money, like play money, for stuff like that. But unless you've got a really like compelling reason to go spend your client's money against something like that, just not quite there. Cause like we're still seeing like good results from, we haven't seen like major drop off in our like standard search and what we're doing there. So like we're a little wait and see on that front because it's, like we don't have a client that I think makes sense for right now. But yeah,
yeah, that's
maybe that'll
interesting.
change.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk to the first media buyers actually bought inventory from ChatGPT. I haven't
I
found one
really
yet, so
Yeah, haven't found one yet. Okay. All right. I don't feel so far behind the curve then.
no, definitely not. I mean, look, I'm maybe a technology, maybe you call me a little bit of a luddite, but when these AI SDRs first popped in, and I was like, oh,
Mhm.
you mean I can just have bots reach out to people, and then like I'll get meetings, and then all I have to do is
What?
show up to the calls. I was like, wow, that sounds fun. And then I fired it up and was sending out like 12,000, not 12,000, 1,200 emails a day. And then I like looked at the back and forth, and these things were just like spamming people. I'm like, this shit doesn't work. So I turned it all off, and I went full analog, one
Mhm.
by one, LinkedIn and cold
Mhm.
email and all the tried and true.
Yeah.
But I always, whenever I talk to sales coaches or sales
Mhm.
leaders, I always ask, and like usually it's the bigger companies that can afford to test those,
Mhm.
those
Yeah.
very premium products. So I think it will probably show up at some point for sure. But
Mhm.
all right, let's talk a little bit about the world of sports betting. Betfred.
Betfred.
So
Oh,
yeah, so
yeah.
obviously, the gambling cost per
Mhm.
acquisition is the most coveted consumer in marketing is the gambler, is the whether that's a casual bettor or a whale, they still have extremely high
Mhm.
cost per acquisition and cost per acquisition values as affiliate
Mhm.
partners. So tell us a little bit about
Mhm.
what does the world look like inside of the media buying ecosystem inside of
Yep.
gaming.
Gaming. Yeah.
I just saw I think Complex is launching
Mhm.
a betting wing or a betting content vertical in
Mhm.
partnership with one of the brands. So it just feels like it's everywhere these days.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten like crazy. Like, and just full disclosure, I haven't worked on Betfred in a while like that. I don't
Sure.
but it's so when I was working on it, it was definitely one of those brands where so they were a UK based company, right? So they were big. They were like very big in the UK. Like they're like Fred, the guy Fred apparently was like this guy who won like the one of those like million to one type of bets and won all this money, right? So he started his own sports book. So coming over to the States was interesting for them because they were coming into what was quickly becoming a really crowded marketplace. So and only regulated in certain states, right? So it was still like really rolling out. At that time, there's only like 9 or 10 states, I think, that it was even legal in. But then they had to individually get regulated, or permissions in each state. So like the rollout was interesting as a in the media marketplace because you're most of the time they would attach themselves to a sports entity, right? Through some sort of sponsorship marketing type of deal,
Like
like
the Penn acquisition of
Mhm.
Barstool, etc.
Yes. So
Yep.
Betfred had like they basically they were doing a lot of NFL stuff. So but it was like these really it was weird because when we first took it over, we were like, what on earth are they doing? Right? Like why are they have these like sort of weird side, like tiny little sponsorship deals with like the Denver Broncos and Cincinnati Bengals and whoever. And we knew it was because they needed to be, needed to have some connection to the state that they were in, but it was more like there was some regulatory thing at the time that they had to kind of work around to kind of get themselves like into the space. So it was always interesting because we were trying to get them to actually use the sponsorship too, right? We're like, you've spent this money, like
Yeah,
you
don't
actually
don't
have.
don't just use it as like mafia money to the regulators.
Right. We're like, you can use this, you can use some of these marks, you have the IP,
Yeah.
like some of and some of them they had actually pretty decent deals where it's
Wow.
like you can do events, like you can go to the games, whatever, you have tickets, whatever. um and so they finally started doing some of that, like where they're like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. But then a lot of times they weren't really thinking about it in that way. They weren't thinking of it as a marketing engine. So they were looking at it like more as, like to your point, mafia money, right? And it's like, here we
Yeah, it's
go.
like pay to play essentially.
Basically, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like once we started kind of getting them there, they're like, "Oh, well, that costs a lot of money to like, we've got to build assets for that. We got to do all that." I'm like, "Well, yeah, like this is why sports marketing is such a big thing." Um, but yeah, then from the pure like media side of it, it was always tricky because we were never really like sure, kind of like with the audience, like what was really driving what was the trigger to use a new one beyond the obvious, right? Like, and everyone was doing the same thing. Everyone was talking about like, just give him money, give him a free,
Free,
give him a free
free
bet, give
credits.
him
Yep.
right, like give him something along those lines and then go. And I'm like, yeah, but like that's not going to get them to like that's not going to build you any kind of loyalty. And ultimately, like they kept coming back like over and over and over again, talking about like, well, our most profitable customers are, it's like lifetime value type of customer. And I'm like, well, yeah, like you want to get these guys who are like big fish who are willing to make lots of bets across many sports because you get the one-off 26-year-old who you gave $500 to get on your platform. They're going to be gone the next time somebody else gives them $500 to be on their platform. And it was, this was the days when like DraftKings was obviously still leading them, was leader of the market, but like you were starting to get like BetMGM and all the other all there. I mean, there was dozens of them at that point that were just cropping up everywhere. Like all the casinos were starting their own, sort of like betting engines. And it was interesting because like Betfred wasn't really like I think they went to market a little too early in the States, like for like not necessarily for the brand. I think they would have done better if they had like their technology just wasn't set up very well. Because I think they
Mm.
were building state by state, but they didn't really build like like a solid infrastructure for all states. So it was like we started running into problems when we are trying to drive traffic to like a Colorado customer and then also drive traffic to like a an Iowa customer or whatever. And it's like all of a sudden these two systems didn't communicate to each other. And it's
Mm,
like, like when you're talking about digital marketing, like that sort of back end communication becomes so vital because now all of a sudden you've got all these like basically mini walled gardens within their own app ecosystem because they had to break it out by state. And it was really, it became tricky. So after a while we kind of were like, we recommended them, we're like, you need to shut this down until you can figure out how to put all this together, because otherwise you're just going to get like random like tiny audience insights from like one market. That's not going to help you very much, and there's no way to like really accurately marry them together across all this stuff because you don't have a single system. So that was about the time I left. It was like I was like, okay, like kind of I moved on to a new life. Like bye. But it's an interesting thing because the consumer is sort of always, to your point, it's always there, right? It's like there's always an appetite for this. And I think it's the kind of place. It's also been historically, I feel like gambling, it's like up there with like alcohol and sex and gambling and,
Vice. Yeah.
like vice advertising, like, so it's always been sort of like one of those sort of like, oh, we can't be in reputable places with this, like, and I was like, oh, they don't care anymore.
They
They
don't.
just
They
don't
don't.
care.
It's like, like all the leagues are in cahoots, all the teams are in cahoots.
Totally. Well,
Um,
and the consumer thinks of it as a game, right? It's fun. It's entertainment. It's not, like it's not like your bookie down the street at the racetrack, who's gonna break your legs if you don't have $50 to give them. It's like,
Totally. And to some degree, like I think the user experience is actually better. Like if you think about
mhm,
like let's talk about horse racing like as an
mhm,
example. So, I went to the Kentucky Derby with a
mhm,
client at my old
mhm,
agency. And one of the things that they did was at the venue, they're like, oh, well, you can walk into the
mhm,
room and like get up from your seat and walk over there. And then you got to know how to speak the lingo when you go up to the counter and not feel like an asshole. And, or you can just download this nice little app and
mhm,
you can place bets, from your seat, and, the money will go right into your account, on the app. And I was like, wow, well, this is actually a really great user experience because now I can stay in the race, so to speak, not go,
mhm.
walk into the ticketing booth and feel like a nerd, like as a first time horse, maybe
Right?
first,
Yeah.
second, third time. I'm not feeling that discomfort of having to go and
Mhm,
interact with a human and like make mistakes or like clog up the line.
mhm,
So the user experience actually was valuable for me. And then the fun thing was like, man, like you get into that app, you get home from the Kentucky Derby with like $300 in your pocket. You're like, wow, there's a horse race that starts every single
every
few
single minute,
minutes.
right?
Yeah, like every 10 minutes there's a new horse race. And then like pretty soon I blow through that $300 pretty
Right.
fast, So
I mean, you're
uh,
carrying around a casino in your pocket at that point, right?
yeah.
Or like the house is always going to win, right?
Exactly. And now there's this new kind of trend around like micro betting. It's like
Hmm.
they don't want you to bet, $500 on the Giants game. They want you to bet $1 that, some particular play is going to happen at this particular time, or this
Hmm.
it's like these like high risk, high reward, like you were talking about that guy, like that 1 in a million guy.
Hmm.
It's like they just want it's that gamification element of like high risk, high reward. It seems like the target
Hmm.
consumer has changed.
Oh yeah, yeah. I definitely think so. I mean, it's like it's funny. Like I watch the like when I see the kids like with their phones out, like I'm like, oh, you're betting. You're on the betting apps. But
they're
what I
either
find, but no, go
they're
ahead.
either betting or looking for girls. One of the
Yeah,
two.
exactly. Right,
Right?
swiping something, right? Yeah, it is
Oh
funny
man.
because I find like the media analytics dudes, they get into the betting because it's like that numbers game, right? They get super into like the I'm gonna find the pattern, sort of vibe, and I'm like, okay, you go for it.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're cracking the odds. And
yeah.
I have heard like same way Vegas kicks players off
Mhm.
the platforms if they get too good. Those apps will kick you off if you win too much. So there's a little bit of
Yep.
that. Yeah,
A little bit of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. All right. So one question I forgot to ask you about San
Mhm.
Francisco. So
Oh yeah.
San Francisco from a media market is this really
Mhm.
interesting market where, you know, most most boards, most outdoor advertising is generally
Mhm.
consumer focused.
Mhm.
Occasionally you'll see the lawyer ads on the side of the
Right.
freeway, and maybe in New York you've got like, the ad tech company next to the Publicis building or whatever,
Mhm.
some strategically placed B2B boards. But San
Mhm.
Francisco, it's the whole city all the way down to San Jose.
Yeah.
Every board is a company, usually a company you've never heard of,
Mhm.
and it's these like horrible B2B
Mhm.
catchphrases that like don't make sense to anybody except the people that it makes sense to.
Mhm.
How do you think that happened in San Francisco, and why did it happen? And do you think it's
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to continue to. It's been that way for 15 years,
Yeah. Oh,
so I
more than
don't think it's
that. Yeah.
ever.
Like,
Oh, maybe
like,
yeah.
oh
You would
yeah.
know
Like, I
longer
mean,
than
this goes
me.
way back because like so when I worked on HP in, let's call it 2002, like we would buy some of those billboards along the 101, like going south, because it'd be like we used to call it like it's the Silicon Valley CEO vanity boards, right? Where it's like they're like and I mean obviously that's it's somewhat unfair because they're still valuable. There's a lot of value to them and from a consumer standpoint, right? But I think
well, hey,
because there was such a concentration. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say I met a woman who works at Qualcomm now,
Mhm.
and she used to work in the studios, and she told me she used to buy the boards in Los Angeles
Mhm.
literally on the car route from her executive producer,
Yeah.
the head of the studio. She'd buy the boards on his route from the studio to his house.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah. Like
I'm
we
sure
used
there's
to
some truth to that.
we used to buy boards that were basically outside the offices of like where the CEO would like could see them. Like I mean, it's like you
Wow.
do, I think it actually did start a little bit more consumer facing because like if I remember correctly, and I mean I may be off on this, but like way back in the day, Yahoo had this board that went over the Bay Bridge. Like it was like this big Yahoo board, and it was like super famous like cheeseball board, like whatever. And it was just like, whatever. So this was probably like the mid 90s they bought, and they had it for like 20 something years. It was crazy. But it was like, and I think it just sort of all started a little bit like that because you had all these tech companies just down like in a row, right? You just like you head from San Francisco down to San Jose, and it's like pretty much tech companies all the way down in those days. I think it just sort of became this like, whose ego is bigger than whose. But I mean, it's funny because it's true of almost anything. Like San Francisco, I think feels more like that because the concentration of tech, right? It's like one industry is really dominating it, but I think it's also and the city itself is so small. There was like when you're going down there, it's like this really concentrated area. But like you even here, like even some of my clients here, they're in there like like you'll get those comments from your client that's sort of like, it'd be really great if my boss could see that, like
Totally.
people love out of
Well,
home for that.
yeah, you always see out of home for the brands that are native to that market, right? Like so when I'm in
Hmm.
Chicago, see, McDonald's
Hmm.
stuff or
Yeah.
BP or
Hmm.
Boeing, whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's common to kind of
Mm.
buy the market in which your corporate headquarters is based. Kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's there. Some of that is the vanity play, and sometimes it's like it's also valid, right? It could be both, like in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, it is funny because like like you get enough media people together and you start like walking around a city and be like, that's for the boss, that's for the boss, like you see it.
So, tell me a little bit about Two
Mhm.
by Four. When did you
Mhm.
start working there? And
Mhm.
if you could say like, here's how Two
Mhm.
by Four is different than
Mhm.
other media agencies out there. How did you
Yeah.
come to the agency, and how
Mhm.
do you differentiate?
So I've only been here for about 8 months. So I started
Oh, very
in
cool.
September. Yeah. So I had taken some time off. I was like, I'd been in my last job for about 8 years and was a little fried and just needed a break and whatnot. So I took some time off, and then it's funny, this recruiter that I'd worked with, like, like for years prior, she just so randomly emails me this job description. She's like, I don't know if you're looking at it or not, but I think you're gonna want to see this. So I like look at it, I was like, okay, this is sort of like right what I love to do, right? So for me personally, it's about being in a small culture driven type of agency that kind of needs somebody to come in and maybe like fix things a little bit, or modernize, restructure. Like I like to kind of get in under the hood and tinker with with the product a little bit, I guess is what I'm saying, right? Because I like that, I enjoy that vibe of like, okay, let's take this what you're already doing that's good and make it great. Like that's a fun task for me. So I think when it comes to two by four, one of the things that I was really drawn to was this concept of, you know, it's an agency that sort of behaves like an extension of a brand, right? So we very much get into this like we want to be an insider, we want to be an extension of you, like we're going to act like employees of your company, but we're still going to bring this outsider agency sort of vibe, right? We're going to bring in like the ideas, and we're going to try, we're going to push the envelope for you too, but we don't feel like we can do that unless we're really embedded into your business, right? You have to know the business in order to know what to change about the business. So I think that sort of really like matched up with my mentality and like what I like to do. And I enjoy being a, two by four is more of a full service type of agency than, in some of the places I've been in the past. And I like that it's like, I'm working in partnership with my creative team and the production team and the organic social and web teams. We're all sort of like in it together, and we're sort of in, I wouldn't we're not actively in pod structure, but we kind of behave that way anyway, where it's like, like every piece of business, it's like I'm sitting down with our, like my chief creative officer, and I always sit in an office like riffing about stuff, just sort of like figuring it out. We talk about, I was talking about the attention thing, we were talking about that last week, and it just sort of like, like, does this, and he's like, that's actually really like helpful for my people to understand, like if this consumer is scrolling and the job of the creative is just pretty much to get them to stop. Like he's like, that's actually a different task than, well, we've got to create this beautiful banner that's doing all this stuff, and I'm like, that they're going to scroll right past, like so, so like we have these conversations, and kind of like I love ideating that way, where you're in this sort of like group think tank. We're always sort of like throwing things over the fence at each other. So I think that's sort of how we differentiate ourselves. It's hard to say. You see, like if you're physically in our office space, it used to be like a dance hall or something way back in the day, but it's like this
Wow.
it's this like space in the round. So like our offices are all kind of like around this one common area. And when the way the creative sort of process works, and we've adopted this into the media process too, where it's like we'll like start visually putting things up on the wall, right, and walking through and sort of like talking about like this concept, or do these things match together, and sort of like play a little bit like it's like a puzzle on the wall. So it's a fun process, and clients get into it too. If you're, every now and again you'll have a client want to come and play with us, like in that, and it's like, okay, let's do this. So we sort of treat everything like, like start out everything with, sort of a little bit of a brainstorm sort of mentality, a little bit of that, like, let's dig the insight out of something, and try to like put that out there and figure out like what's really going on. Like we talk a lot about, not every brand, is always moving forward, right? There's always those moments where your brand gets stuck at stuff, and that's one of the things that we like to kind of problem solve for, is like, how do we unstick somebody? How do we get them unstuck from their brand problem right now? And that's, like a lot of the way that we operate with that is just sort of like getting in the trenches with them, and then showing them how to change that.
It sounds like being back in the office is somewhat important to the way you guys function as a
Mhm.
culture, and even down to the strategy level. What's
Mhm.
your guys' current setup for a return to office? How's it going?
Yeah. So we're sort of in flux right now. We've been playing with it. So we've gone from everything from 4 days a week to 2 days a week, and we're still sort of like trying to figure out the best mix for us, because we have offices here in Chicago. We have several remote, like fully remote people, and then we have another office in Nashville. So it's this sort of like, okay, we've got these sort of different groups doing different things. Like my media team, it's about half and half. Like half of them are in Nashville, half of them are in Chicago, and so we're trying to figure out how to best simulate like being together even when it's remote, because I
Mm,
think, like it's tough, because I think there's value to both sides of it, right? I think as an employee, we hear loud and clear from our teams, right, that there's a trust thing in there. It's like, if you don't trust us to work remote, type of vibe, which I mean, we hear, you're going to hear that as an executive team. You're going to be like, okay, like they're doing their work, they're delivering. And I think some of it is about changing the way as a manager you have expectations of somebody. It's like, I joke with my team, I'm like, I don't really care where the work gets done as long as the work gets done, right? If the work is done, great. So we're sort of maneuvering around that right now and trying to, because I don't think there's one right answer, because I think every employee is slightly different. And it is tough though, because you're right. It is sort of in our DNA to sort of be collaborative and be physically together. So it's that, I think what happens is, like, those of us who have remote people or people in the other office that we kind of want to deal with regularly, there's, we'll travel, like, well, it's, getting back into the, like, days where it's like, God, I used to travel like 4 days a week, like, in the old days. But now I'm like, okay, trying to figure that out, or pairing people up with somebody that, like, where they work well together in a remote, in this kind of environment. So I don't know, like, it's I think that's one of the trickier things that almost any company is dealing with, right? 'Cause it's like you get people who go real hardcore, real fast about, like, return to office 5 days a week or whatever. And I think that doesn't really help either, because I think that just makes people resent you, when you're forcing them, because the genie's out of the bottle. Like,
Well, and
on
I
that.
think
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is, like, the world didn't end when we all had to work from home, right? Like,
Right.
we proved that it was possible. People could get their jobs
Mhm.
done. I always think about it as this idea of, like, I like to have a little sprinkling of, I work one way when I'm here in my home
Mhm.
office slash studio. I work another way when I'm out to clients and spending time with the clients. And for me, that's my office, because I don't have my own
Mhm.
office. I did over the summer. But when I'm in the office, it's because I'm with clients. And then there's
Mhm.
also, like, the travel component. Like, I'm working a different way when I'm traveling to a conference, while
Mhm.
I'm at a conference, and when I leave the conference.
Mhm.
And, all of those add different elements of, you know, production and velocity. But I'll tell you, like, like, when I'm with clients in office, I get absolutely nothing done, but I build great
But
relationships,
build the relationships. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and, like, you think you're not getting anything done, but the conversation that you just had by
Mhm.
looking at somebody over there was a text message that you didn't have to send, or a Slack you
Mhm.
didn't have to send, or an email you didn't have to
Mhm.
send, or a phone call you didn't have to schedule. So I think people forget, or maybe they're not as aware of, they're like, oh, I'm getting nothing done in person. But then maybe you're getting a lot done that you normally would have to do all these other, like, more formal channels to actually
Mhm.
execute if you weren't in the room.
Yeah, yeah. FaceTime is one of those things where it's like being physically in a room with somebody is noticeably different, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's
I mean,
chemistry.
yeah, it's just like, you just know, like, it's like, you go out to dinner with a client, and the relationship you build from that is so much, makes everything else you're going to do later so much easier. Yeah, it's
Oh my
just like,
gosh.
okay. Yeah, like, I mean, it's like you go from, like, a client you think doesn't like you very much, and you have a couple of drinks with them. And it's like, hey, now we're best friends, right?
Exactly. Now there's no way you can fire me. All right. You've spent some time marketing in the university setting as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's an interesting moment in
Mhm.
university
Yeah.
marketing. You've got
Yeah.
declining birth rates. You've
Mhm.
got affordability. You've got
Mhm.
brand recognition, for better or for worse. Like, half of America, the conservative
Mhm.
side, literally thinks that universities are brainwashing their children, right? So, like, there's a real fear element to
Mhm.
that. There's a lot of headwinds
Yeah.
going up and get against colleges. I'd be
Mhm.
curious, if you have any, reaction to,
Yeah.
like, how do you succeed in the current
Mhm.
landscape as an education marketer?
Yeah, it's a really interesting space, right? Like, we work with a couple of universities right now, and they're all of those things that you just said are, like, straight up, like, where they're what keeps them up at night, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, you have to sit down and sort of, like, map out the journey of the student, right? Like, of these prospective students, and, like, where's their head at? When do they, like, because one of the questions that we kept coming back to is, like, when do they sort of really make their shortlist decision anyway, right? Like, before they ever apply, before they get into this place, when do they start building any kind of affinity towards schools, right? Like, what's that point? Like I'll let you know if we ever figure it out. But right. But it is sort of one of those questions. You're like, where's those exposure things, right? And there's obviously like elements of lots of things, right? Like the parents and like various influences around their world. But it's also you have to kind of meet these students, especially I think when you get to this Gen Alpha, these kids that are, like getting ready to go into college now, and it's like they're so different than we were, like and it's like the world has changed so much with the way that they consume things, the way that they, make decisions. And I think also the pressures that are on them are a lot different than they were when we were younger. So it's a lot of it is like you kind of have to talk to them where they're at as opposed to expect them to come to you, because I think a lot of them aren't really interested. If you start talking to them about curriculum and like we're the best at this and the best at that, like that there's eventually a place for that, but I think you kind of have to reel them in a little bit. Like doing like I think good organic social is super important for universities at this point, because that's how kids are really sort of encountering things in the wild, right? Like I think there's something to be said about like sports, if it's televised sports, like you get a televised football game, even if you're in the school that gets crushed, you get recognition from it, right? But
Yeah,
it's
there's some awareness plays for sure there.
yeah, so it's like, I mean, there's so many avenues for that. But I mean, I think what we found is most universities that we've dealt with have been very decentralized in this marketing function, right? Where it's like a lot of like individual departments or school of business or whatever, right? Like all of these like sort of like sub organizations within the university structure. And as an agency, you kind of have to get under the hood a little bit with that and sort of be like, okay, we got to structure some of this and we got to put some rules in place, and we've got to like make sure, like, so we will often start with what we call like a search and social audit, which is basically like getting under the hood in their accounts, not even like what they're posting, but like getting under the and see how they've structured things. Like, you've built this wrong, or you've built this and you've built these 15 different versions of this thing, and now we gotta like, let's get it all common so that you're at least getting the same type of data. It's like building data hierarchy, right? It's like you got to build
Mhm.
in all of this stuff to where it's like you're getting all of the information that you need out of all of these different systems you've got going on. And some, most of them have some sort of CRM, like a Slate, or something like a Salesforce, something along those lines, where the application process is pumping into. But it's also like those systems aren't often talking to the marketing systems. So it's a lot of these things where it's like, okay, you've got to start by like fine tuning all the things you're already doing and making those things, polish those up to where they're working appropriately. And that's important, because no matter how good you are at the actual marketing part of it, if you're not good at the measuring part of it, you're not learning anything. You're not going to be able to do anything new with it. So some of it is operational, right? There's a systems sort of thought process that has to go into that. And then some of it is really dependent on like, like, okay, what does this university stand for? Is the brand strong enough? Is it, like all the classic marketing things that you have to do? And then there's like an added layer of like, there's probably like three or four different types of audiences that you're talking to, not just even amongst the students, like it's the students, it's their parents, it's the grandparents, it's their siblings, whatever, it's like all of these external forces, because you're talking to a kid that's making what is a very huge decision. One of the biggest decisions of their life is happening right then in this
Yeah,
moment. And
probably the biggest decision up to that point for sure.
absolutely, right. It's just like, okay, like, and when we think about that a lot, where they're like, okay, like, where do you go with that, right? Like, how do you treat that? Because there's the kids that are going to be like interested in the curriculum messaging, right? Some of them are going to be like, I'm going to be an engineer, I want to go to a best engineering school or whatever. And then you've got the kids that are sort of like, I want to go to a party school, like, and
Yeah,
everything in between.
I want to have a fun social experience
Mhm.
at the SAE
Yeah.
house while I'm figuring it out, right?
Exactly. Right. So it is that, like, I think that's what makes it such an interesting thing, is it's like, you talk about a university like it's like an entity, right? But it's really not. It's however many students there are entities, like it's kind of one of those things. And it's a hard marketing problem because of that, because it's not like, you know you're selling, a luxury automobile. You can break that down pretty quickly into who's going to buy and who's not going to buy, right? But you look at like a university and you're like, no, there's a note of aspiration in that, there's a note of legacy in that, there's a note of, yeah, like
Portability,
all of these
ROI.
things play a role. So it's like you kind of have to really like build. And I think what we found is like with all the ones that we've touched, it's had to build these sort of like systems in place to where it's like, we're, like we're sort of getting into this like dynamic creative rotation type of thought process too, where it's like, okay, maybe we need to start needing to like really implement DCO so that it's like, we're constantly putting something, like what's going to stick, right? Like a little bit of
Yeah,
that.
almost like if there was an industry that needed personalization, that
Mhm.
was probably, the flagship
Oh
almost
yeah.
in a
And then,
way.
sometimes they have different needs too. Sometimes it's not just about enrollment, right? Some of these schools are more interested or they've identified like oh, we need to be better ranked in, school rankings X, Y, and Z. How do we do that? Right. And then you're doing a whole lot of other digging. And that's almost like a B2B play, right? Where you're like talking about something totally different and just trying to get the school recognition from like the peer community or the news community or whatever. And it's, so like there's always a different problem, and it's, I don't know, that's like what I think is fun about it. I don't know, I just rambled at you for like 10 minutes, sorry.
No, I love it. It's interesting. Well, Jason, fascinating conversation. I had a lot of fun learning about 2x4 and your career in the industry. If folks want to follow along with your thinking or learn more about the agency, where would you like to send them?
2x4.com. That's
Let's
do
go.
it there. I mean, we have a LinkedIn account, we have Instagram, whatever. We're on all the socials under 2x4. It's 2x4 on the socials.
All the
Yeah.
spots. And for those of you who are at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening to the show, a organic review, a honest review is how we find a larger audience. And last but not least, if there is a sports marketer or education marketer or somebody out there in agency land, maybe a brand in Chicago, who you think would benefit from the conversation that I had with Jason today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I will thank you for spending this time with the audience today, Jason. Appreciate your
Thank you
time.
very much. It's been fun. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks.